I have a question for you. When was the last time you thought about your office printer?
Hopefully never. I mean, if I'm thinking about the printer, it usually means something has gone terribly wrong.
Right. It's that device we all love to hate.
Okay.
It sits in the corner, it jams, and then inevitably that little red light starts blinking. The ink is out.
Yep. The dreaded red light.
But, and stick with me here, what do you do when that happens? Do you call in a team of chemical engineers to rebuild the machine? Do you put on a hazmat suit and inject liquid dye into the print heads with a syringe?
I see where you're going with this. You just pop open the lid, pull out the old plastic cartridge, and drop in a new one.
Click. Done. It is the most mundane, boring maintenance task in the world. But today, I want to take that mundane plastic cartridge, and I want you to imagine scaling it up.
Okay.
Imagine that cartridge is the size of a grain silo. And instead of cyan or magenta ink, it is filled with liquid uranium dissolved in molten salt.
That is quite the leap from office supplies to nuclear physics.
It is. But that analogy, the disposable, swappable cartridge, is the absolute heart of the story we are covering today. We are looking at a company that claims to have turned the nuclear power plant from a massive, bespoke construction nightmare into a manufactured product, a nuclear battery.
And this isn't just a science project anymore. We are talking about terrestrial energy.
Ticker symbol IMSR. And if you've been watching the financial wires today, January 22, 2026, you know exactly why we're doing this deep dive right now.
The timing is pretty remarkable.
Between the absolute desperation of the AI hyperscalers for power and a massive announcement from the Department of Energy that dropped this morning, this company has suddenly found itself in the eye of the storm.
It really has. If you just look back at the last, say, 2 years, we've seen this AI energy crisis just completely explode. You have Google, Microsoft, Amazon. They're building these gigawatt-scale data centers to train their models. And they are hungry.
Hungry is an understatement. They are starving for power. And not just any power. They need firm, 247, never flicker power.
Exactly. Solar and wind are fantastic technologies, but an AI training cluster can't just pause because the sun went down or the wind stopped blowing in the North Sea. They need baseload.
The kind of power that just works.
Yeah.
All the time.
And for a long time, the only real answers to that were fossil fuels or traditional nuclear. But traditional nuclear, well, it has a reputation for being slow.
Glacial. Expensive. Unbelievably complicated.
So the mission for this deep dive is to really figure out if terrestrial energy has actually solved that problem. We need to unpack 3 specific things.
Right. Lay that out.
First, the machine itself, the integral molten salt reactor, or IMSR. It's totally different from what you see on The Simpsons.
No glowing green rods.
None. Second, the business model, which surprisingly is incredibly close to that printer analogy you started with.
And third, what's the last piece?
The fuel. And I cannot stress this enough, the fuel strategy is the spy thriller part of this story, while almost every other advanced nuclear startup is chasing a high-tech fuel that basically doesn't exist yet in the West. Terrestrial made a very, very different bet.
They bet on the old stuff.
They did. And that one decision might be the difference between bankruptcy and a multi-trillion-dollar market opportunity.
Okay, let's get into the machine. When I picture a nuclear reactor, I picture that giant concrete dome. I picture fuel rods being lowered into water. I picture, high stakes. What is terrestrial actually building?
To understand the innovation, you first have to understand the fundamental flaw in the legacy technology. For 70 years, the entire world has run on light water reactors. We take uranium, we bake it into these hard ceramic pellets.
Right.
We stack those pellets in long metal tubes called fuel rods, and then we submerge the whole thing in a big tank of water.
It sounds simple enough. The uranium gets hot, boils the water, and the steam spins a turbine. Basic high school physics.
It is simple in concept, but physics gets in the way. We all know water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, right?
Yeah.
But to generate electricity efficiently, you need steam that is much, much hotter than that. So how do you keep water liquid at 300 degrees?
You put a lid on it, you pressurize it.
You pressurize it immensely. A standard reactor operates at around 150 atmospheres of pressure. That is a ticking bomb of potential energy just sitting there.
That's a lot of pressure.
It's terrifying. If a pipe cracks, that superheated water instantly flashes to steam and expands explosively. And that is why you need the dome. That thick, steel-reinforced concrete containment building isn't there to generate power. It is there to keep the explosion inside if the pressure system fails.
So a huge chunk of the cost of a traditional nuclear plant isn't really the fuel or the reactor. It's the bomb-proof safety infrastructure required to contain all that pressure.
Precisely. It turns a power plant into a mega construction project that takes a decade and billions of dollars. So Terrestrial Energy looked at this and said, let's just change the physics.
How do you do that?
They use the IMSR, the integral molten salt reactor. Instead of solid fuel rods, they take the uranium and dissolve it directly into a liquid salt mixture.
So the fuel is a liquid.
The fuel is the coolant. It's all one homogeneous liquid salt. And here is the magic number. That salt mixture doesn't boil until it hits about 1400 degrees Celsius.
That is incredibly hot.
It's fantastically hot, but the reactor only operates at around 700 degrees Celsius. So you have a 700-degree safety buffer before it even thinks about boiling.
Which means the liquid isn't trying to turn into a gas. It isn't trying to explode.
It's just sitting there, circulating calmly. It has no desire to be anywhere else.
And that means you don't need the pressure.
Zero pressure. Well, atmospheric pressure. The same pressure as the room we're sitting in right now. If you poke a hole in the tank, the salt just leaks out onto the floor.
And then you have a radioactive puddle.
Not for long. Because it relies on the heat from the core to stay liquid, as soon as it leaks out and cools down, it freezes. It turns back into a solid rock. And it traps all the dangerous fission products inside that rock. It's a walk-away safe design.
So you don't need the billion-dollar concrete dome. You just need a standard industrial building.
That is the economic breakthrough. It decouples safety from these massive bespoke construction costs. But there is another problem with molten salt that held it back for decades.
Corrosion.
Corrosion. I was going to ask about that. I remember reading about the experiments back at Oak Ridge in the 1960s. It's basically radioactive acid, right? It just eats metal.
It's chemically aggressive, yes. And it's particularly hard on the graphite moderator inside the core, which is essential for the nuclear reaction. In the old days, the scientists thought, okay, we'll build a complex chemical plant attached to the reactor to constantly filter the salt and repair the core on the fly, which sounds incredibly complicated and expensive.
It's an operational nightmare, trying to fix a highly radioactive machine while it's running. So Terrestrial looked at that problem and said, no, we aren't going to fix it. We are going to replace it.
We are back to the printer cartridge.
This is their core unit concept. This is the big idea. They put the graphite, the heat exchangers, the pumps, and the fuel salt all inside one single factory-welded sealed vessel, a pot.
And it runs for a set period of time.
It runs for exactly 7 years. They know the corrosion will happen. They know the graphite will degrade over time.
But they just don't care?
They don't care because the lifespan of the unit is designed to end long before anything critical can break. After 7 years, you switch the unit off. You let it cool down for a few months. Then you just disconnect it, move it to an underground storage silo right there in the facility, and you drop in a brand new factory-built core unit.
That is such a fundamental shift in mindset. You stop treating the reactor like a cathedral that has to last for 60 years, and you start treating it like a consumable part, a battery.
It completely changes the economics. It turns nuclear from a construction industry into a manufacturing industry. You build these core units on an assembly line, like jet engines, and ship them to site.
And the efficiency gains you mentioned, they're pretty staggering.
Yeah.
Because it can run at that much higher temperature, 700 degrees versus 300 for water. They get much better thermodynamic efficiency.
I have 44% efficiency written down in my notes here.
Right. Legacy nuclear is about 33% efficient on a good day. The IMSR is 44%. That is a nearly 50% jump in the amount of electricity you get from the exact same amount of heat.
But the temperature unlocks something else, something the market is just now starting to really value.
Industrial heat.
This is the so what for the entire heavy industry sector.
Absolutely. If you are a steel manufacturer or you're trying to make green hydrogen or ammonia for fertilizer, you need heat. Massive amounts of high-temperature heat.
And a standard nuclear plant giving you 300-degree steam. That's useless. You can't smelt steel with that. You can't crack water for hydrogen efficiently.
But the IMSR delivers process heat at, what, 585 degrees Celsius?
585 degrees. That is the industrial sweet spot. It allows you to decarbonize chemical synthesis, steelmaking, and heavy industry in a way that wind and solar simply cannot.
You can't run a chemical plant on intermittent solar. You need that firm, high-grade heat. 247.
So they aren't just competing for the electrical grid. They are opening up a multi-trillion-dollar market that renewables literally can't touch.
Okay, the machine sounds impressive. The physics make sense. But we have seen plenty of companies with better mousetraps go completely bust because they couldn't figure out how to sell them.
Right.
So let's talk about the business model.
Right.
Because when I look at their corporate structure, they don't look like a utility. Not at all.
And that's completely intentional. They call it an asset-light strategy. Terrestrial Energy is not in the business of pouring concrete or managing power lines or dealing with customers. They don't want to be Duke Energy or Southern Company.
They want to be the guy selling the shovel during the gold rush, not the guy digging the hole.
Or, to keep with our analogies, they want to be GE Aviation. GE sells the jet engine to Boeing. Boeing builds the plane. The airline flies it. Terrestrial licenses the IMSR designed to the utility pays to build the plant. But, and here is the kicker.
The razor and blade.
The printer and the ink.
Exactly. Once that utility builds the plant, they have a 50 or 60-year asset on their books. But every 7 years, that plant needs a new core unit. And it needs the specific proprietary fuel salt that goes inside it. And I'm guessing you can't just buy generic IMSR salt on Amazon.
Not a chance. Terrestrial is the sole supplier. They are the licensor of the technology and the exclusive supplier of the core components. So once a customer signs that initial contract, they are locked into Terrestrial's ecosystem for half a century.
That creates an incredibly predictable, recurring revenue stream.
Which investors love. It's not a one-time sale, it's a 50-year service contract. But let's ground this in reality. It's January 2026. Does this company actually have any money coming in right now?
In terms of revenue, no. Absolutely zero. As of their last filing, for the 9 months ended September 2025, they had zero revenue. They're a pre-revenue R&D focused company.
They're burning cash to get to the finish line.
A lot of it. But they did get a big infusion of cash recently, right? They went public.
Yes, back on October 29, 2025. They merged with a special purpose acquisition company, a SPAC, called HCM2 Acquisition Corp. They listed on the NASDAQ under the ticker IMSR.
And that deal brought in how much?
About $292 million in gross proceeds. So they have a war chest now to get them through these final development stages.
And they used that transition to clean up the corporate structure. I saw
Yeah.
they re-domiciled from Canada to Delaware, set up headquarters in Charlotte, North Carolina.
All the standard stuff. But what really stood out to me in that SPAC deal wasn't the money they raised, but the money they didn't take off the table.
You mean the insiders?
Exactly. Usually, in a SPAC deal, you see the founders and the early private equity guys cashing out a bit, buying the yacht. In this case, the insiders rolled 100% of their equity into the new public company.
That is a very strong signal of confidence.
It suggests they believe the real value hasn't been realized yet. And they have lockup periods in place. They can't sell their shares for at least 12 months or until the share price hits specific targets like $15 or $20.
They're betting on the long game. They're all in.
They are. So they have the machine, they have the business model, and they have the cash to keep the lights on for the foreseeable future. But now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Or rather, the Russian bear in the room.
The fuel war. This is the part of the research that really surprised me. I just assumed uranium was uranium. But apparently there are different flavors, and picking the wrong one is potentially fatal for a company.
It is the single biggest strategic trap in the entire advanced nuclear sector right now. To understand this, we have to get slightly technical about enrichment.
Let's do it. Break it down for us.
Most of the competitors we hear about, companies like TerraPower, Oklo, X Energy, they designed their advanced reactors to run on something called HALEU. That stands for High Assay Low Enriched Uranium.
Okay.
It's uranium that's enriched to a level of about 15% to 20% of the U-235 isotope.
And why was that the popular choice? What's the appeal?
Because on paper, from a pure physics perspective, it is superior. Higher enrichment means higher energy density. It allows you to build physically smaller reactor cores that can run for much longer before needing to be refueled. If you're a physicist sitting in a lab, you choose HALEU every time. It's elegant.
But we don't live in a lab. We live in a world with geopolitics and supply chains.
And that is where the trap snapped shut. For decades, the commercial supply chain for HALEU was effectively a monopoly run by Russia. When the geopolitical situation imploded in the early 2020s, that supply essentially vanished for Western markets.
So all these companies have designed these high-performance engines that run on a fuel that simply isn't available from a trusted source.
Effectively, yes. The industry is facing what's been called a catastrophic supply shock for HALEU. The US and UK governments are now throwing billions of dollars at building a domestic enrichment capacity, but you cannot build a centrifuge plant overnight.
It takes years.
It takes years to permit, to build, to certify the security. It's a massive undertaking.
So companies like Oklo and TerraPower are essentially stuck in line, waiting for a fuel that might not exist in commercial quantities until the 2030s.
Meanwhile, Terrestrial Energy looks like the smartest player on the field. Because way back in 2015, they made a conscious, strategic decision to go in a completely different direction.
They chose HALEU.
They chose SLE, standard assay low-enriched uranium.
The regular unleaded of the nuclear world.
That's the perfect way to put it. This is uranium enriched to less than 5%. It is the global industry standard. It is what every single large nuclear power plant in the world uses today.
Which means you can actually buy it.
You can buy it from Westinghouse, from Urenco in Europe, from Orano in France. You can ship it in transport casks that are already licensed and been used for 50 years. There is no supply shock. There is no waiting line.
But there has to be a catch, right? If HALEU is better, from a physics standpoint, what was the trade-off? What did Terrestrial have to give up to use this standard fuel?
They gave up a little bit of size. Because the fuel isn't as energy dense, the IMSR core has to be physically larger and heavier to get the same power output as a HALEU-based design.
So it's a bigger battery.
It's a bigger, heavier cartridge. But their calculation was one of simple pragmatism. They basically said, I would rather have a slightly larger machine that I can actually fuel today than a tiny, perfect machine that sits empty for 5 or 10 years waiting for a fuel supply chain to be built from scratch.
It's the difference between a working pickup truck and a Ferrari with an empty gas tank.
And the cost difference is just staggering. Right now, HALEU is estimated to cost around $32,600 per kilogram.
Wow. Okay.
HALEU. It's about $2,700 per kilogram.
So their fuel costs are literally more than 10 times lower than their competitors. That's not a small advantage.
It creates a massive economic moat around their business. While their rivals are lobbying Congress to build centrifuges, Terrestrial can just pick up the phone and place a purchase order.
And this pragmatism seems to be paying off in a big way, especially with what happened today. Let's talk about the news. Section 4, the catalyst. It's January 2026. What just happened with the Department of Energy?
We are seeing the U.S. government step in to aggressively fast-track this specific technology. They're using a special contracting mechanism called Other Transaction Authority, or OTA.
That sounds incredibly bureaucratic. What does it actually mean in simple terms?
It's the government's way of bypassing its own red tape. Traditional federal contracting and procurement processes take forever. They're designed for buying aircraft carriers, not for nimble tech development.
Right.
OTA allows the Department of Energy to act more like a venture capitalist. They can structure flexible public-private partnerships and cut checks much, much faster to get critical projects off the ground.
And they are using this for two specific projects with Terrestrial, Tetra and Tefla. Let's start with Tetra. What is that?
Project Tetra is the big one. This is the non-nuclear reactor pilot. The goal is to build an electrically heated pilot unit to validate all the physics models, the heat transfer, the fluid dynamics for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And the timeline is incredibly aggressive.
How aggressive are we talking?
They are targeting initial criticality, or in this case, the operational launch of the test facility by July 4th, 2026.
Independence Day. That is very specific and very soon.
It's symbolic, for sure, but it's also a hard deadline. That is less than 6 months from today. If they hit that date, they move from being a PowerPoint company to an operating company. It proves the machine works as designed. It's a massive de-risking event.
And then there's Project Tefla, which was the big announcement this morning.
Right, January 22nd. Tefla is the fuel pilot. This new agreement authorizes the domestic production of that proprietary IMSR fuel salt using the standard HALEU.
So the government is basically paying to prove out their fuel supply chain.
Exactly. By funding this, the DOE is implicitly validating the entire SCWU strategy. They are saying, we know this fuel is available. Now let's prove we can mix it into salt on an industrial scale right here in the U.S.
And there's even bigger money looming in the background. I saw something about an $890 million loan in their investor materials.
That is the big prize. The DOE Loan Programs Office has officially accepted Part 1 of Terrestrial's application for an $890 million loan guarantee. Their application is currently under review.
And to be clear, that's not a grant for R&D. That's a loan guarantee for commercial construction.
Correct. That money would be used to backstop the financing for their first commercial deployment, and they already have a partner lined up for that, Texas A&M University.
The Aggies are getting a nuclear plant.
They are. The plan is to build it at the Rellis campus, which is part of Texas A&M. The university has a 1-gigawatt power initiative to power its operations. It's the perfect testing ground. You have a sophisticated customer that understands nuclear science, desperately needs the power, and wants the prestige of being the first to deploy this new technology.
So let's recap. We had the innovative machine, the razor and blade business model, the massive fuel advantage, and now significant government backing. It all sounds incredibly bullish.
It does.
But when I look at the stock market, Terrestrial is trading at a discount compared to some of its peers, like Oklo. Why the disconnect? What is the market not seeing?
It's a fascinating study in market psychology. Simon Irish, the CEO of Terrestrial, he likes to compare this moment to the shale oil revolution back in, say, 2006 or 2008.
I remember that. The fracking boom.
Right. In the early days, what he calls phase one investors just bought the sector. If you had a lease in the Permian Basin, people threw money at you. It didn't matter if you had good rock or bad rock. It was a mania.
And Irish thinks the advanced nuclear sector is in phase one right now.
Exactly. Investors are just buying nuclear because of the AI story. They're buying the hype. But in phase two of the shale boom, investors realized that geology matters. Some land had oil, some didn't. The market started to differentiate between high-quality and low-quality assets.
And Terrestrial is arguing that they have the superior geology because they have the fuel.
That's their core thesis. They believe that once the market moves to phase two and realizes the HALEU supply chain is years away, capital will flow to the companies that can actually deploy.
But right now, the market seems to be in love with the celebrity factor.
That's a big part of it. You can't deny it. Look at Oklo. Their chairman is Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. That carries massive halo effect. Investors assume that if the king of AI is backing a nuclear company, it must be the winner for AI.
There's also the regulatory aspect, which is always a question mark.
Yes, the market hates uncertainty. And Terrestrial is, on paper, technically behind some other companies in the formal NRC licensing process.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Right. A company like Nescale, for example, has been slogging through the NRC's design certification process for years. The market might be pricing in the risk that the NRC, which has never licensed a commercial molten salt reactor before, might drag its feet or find some unexpected issue.
They're worried the regulators will just say no.
Or just not yet. And in the startup world, a 2-year delay can be a death sentence.
So let's play devil's advocate. What actually kills this company? If you're a skeptic, what's the big risk? What keeps the engineers up at night?
Corrosion. We have to come back to the salt. We know the physics works. We know the chemistry works in a lab beaker for a few hundred hours. But can modern materials, the specific alloys they're using for that core unit, actually withstand 700-degree radioactive salt flowing through them for 7 straight years without failing?
If a pump impeller dissolves after 3 years instead of 7?
Then the entire business model breaks. If you have to swap that battery every 3 years, your operating costs more than double. Your margins vanish. The entire economic proposition falls apart. That 7-year cycle is not just a goal. It's a critical engineering bet.
And then there is just the sheer difficulty of execution.
First-of-a-kind engineering is brutal. It's always harder, slower, and more expensive than you project. Look at what happened in Nescale with their UAMPS project in Utah. It got canceled because costs spiraled out of control.
Right.
Building the first one is always the hardest. If Terrestrial misses that July 4, 2026 deadline for Project Tetra, the stock will get hammered, and investors will start to doubt their ability to execute.
And of course, there are the broader critics, like the IEEFA, who argue that small modular reactors, SMRs, in general are just a distraction. They say renewables are cheaper and we should just build more solar and batteries.
That is the standard critique. Too slow, too expensive, too risky. And for powering the grid in a place with lots of sun or wind, maybe they have a point. But for providing industrial heat, for powering a 24/7 data center in Ohio, batteries and wind can't do that yet.
So here's where we land. Terrestrial Energy is a bet on pragmatism over perfection. In a world chasing a theoretically superior fuel, they are betting on good enough physics combined with available right now fuel.
That is the perfect summary. They are the fast follower that might actually finish first because they didn't get stuck trying to reinvent the wheel, or in this case, the fuel.
The clock is ticking. July 4, 2026. Project Tetra.
That is the put up or shut up moment. If that test reactor goes live and the data looks good, I think that valuation gap with its peers closes very, very quickly. If it doesn't, well, it's just another delay in an industry that's famous for them.
But here's the final thought. If the AI data centers truly need this power now, and they can't wait for a HALEU supply chain to be built from scratch in the 2030s, is the nuclear battery the only shovel-ready option for the AI gold rush?
It's certainly the one with the fullest gas tank, ready to go today.
We will find out in July. Thanks for diving in with us on this one. It's going to be a very interesting year for the entire energy sector.
Stay curious.
See you next time.